Claudia, thank you very much for coming down. I feel like this is going to be a really good conversation because neurodivergence isn't really a word that I've heard much of in the past, and my sort of way into this big wide world of psychology and the brain and the nervous system and things was through addiction and learning about trauma. That's where the podcast stemmed from, was about, I was in a 20-year drug addiction. But the more I'm progressing, the more I believe that there's a lot more to me than just talking about addiction. And Dan put me onto you. He told me that, you know, you're the go-to woman when it comes to talking about trauma and children. I believe it's a really important topic of conversation because as humans, as adults, we seem to, without the mindset of, or the knowledge that you've got, you just think the kids are fine. And in reality is a lot of the time they're not. So thank you very much for coming down.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And you've just touched on so much absolutely key stuff, is that what's even worse than an assumption that kids are fine is that when kids are not doing fine, that we create a narrative, we frame them as the problem rather than looking at the bigger picture. And what I find really interesting about the work that you're doing and the lens that you're kind of looking at experiences through, the lens of addiction, is all of the layers behind addiction. So nobody has an issue with addiction in isolation. Yeah. So very often people who struggle with addictions, they have been trauma experienced, maybe they've been care experienced, maybe they're neurodivergent. And what we're beginning to understand more clearly through looking at data and research and studies is the correlation between neurodivergence and addiction. So for individuals who have an ADHD brain type, what we're beginning to understand about ADHD is that it seems ADHD brains use dopamine and produce dopamine differently to neuronormative brains. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if our brain is struggling to produce or use dopamine efficiently, our brain will try and help us out by looking for dopamine elsewhere. And addictive relationships with drugs, alcohol, food, exercise, you know, we can have an addictive relationship with pretty much anything. The function of that in a brain chemistry sense is we get a ton of dopamine. So that's a win-win for our brain. And then if we think about addiction in relation to trauma, if our brain perceives that we are in pain, we are in emotional pain, we're in physical pain, our brain's sole focus will be to dial that pain down for us. And the function of addiction is it addresses that pain.
So myself and Zoe, we have this conversation quite a lot, and Gabo Mate was somebody I was introduced to last year, and I've stole his quote and I use it a lot. And it's addiction is a psychological and emotional response to human suffering. Absolutely. Whatever that may look like. And Zoe seems to think that sometimes that isn't or that isn't always necessarily the problem behind the addiction. Sometimes it can just strictly be environment. And it's an important question, and I think it's a question that I'm searching more and more for. But I've spoke to probably over 100 people over the last 12 months, and every one of them has a pain behind the addiction. So I've got a couple of questions. From what you sent me the other night and the background you've got, it seems you've done a bit of this, bit of that. So what was the moment or the experience that you had that sort of allowed you to start exploring this avenue of neurodivergence, trauma, the brain? You've been a teacher, you've been a carer as well. Was there any in particular moment? Was it something you wanted to do from a younger age? Is it something that you fell into?
Fell into.
Was it?
I'm not very good at planning.
Same.
So The teaching, that was planned, and I loved every moment of it. And then when I was teaching, I sort of fell into being special needs coordinator. And then from there, fell into being child protection officer. And when I was teaching and I was the child protection officer, I'd go home from school and I'd be just absolutely bending my husband's ears, going, oh, this is so terrible, you know, what's happened with these young people. And I was working with young people at the point at which they left their families. So deeply, deeply traumatic. Traumatic for the parents, traumatic for the kids, you know, just so much trauma. And traumatic for staff members in the school, you know, traumatic for members of my team who were supporting these young people through potentially the most painful experience of their young lives. And these were very, very young children. So I'd go home yipping on about this every single night. And eventually my husband said, look, will we just become foster carers? So I ground this poor man down. He was just a husk. And then we became foster carers. And I was working for the local authority where we lived as a teacher, obviously, and went to one of their information evenings. And because the whole world of, you know, fostering, local authorities are existing on a shoestring and have been for a very long time. So it was kind of, have you got a spare room? How many beds can you fit in it? And I was like, that's not the sort of foster carer that I want to be. Because up close firsthand, I'd seen the challenges these young to were facing, and giving them a bed in a spare room wasn't really gonna cut it. So shopped around, and then we started fostering for a specialist therapeutic fostering agency. And we did a ton of training so that we could be therapeutic foster carers, not, you know, here's a clean bed and I'll feed you 3 times a day, which isn't wanting to be at all dismissive of all the other foster carers out there, because we're all doing the best we can with the tools available to us. But I knew from my teaching experience that those tools were not going to be sufficient. So we went with this agency, and we were doing respite fostering for young people with disabilities, because my husband's a wheelchair user, has been for a very long time. So our houses are always adapted for wheelchair use. So it was a good fit for us that we provided respite breaks for young people with disabilities so their carers could, you know, have a bit of time off, go on holiday, do whatever they needed to do. So we fell into that. And then that didn't work so well for our biological daughter, because she was quite little at the time, and she'd fall in love with these new people who were there for a week or a fortnight. They were her new best mate, and then they'd go again, and she was devastated. So we thought, right, well, we need somebody permanent so that this is going to work for our biological daughter, because it's a team effort, it needs to work for everybody. So then our young man joined us 11 years ago. And his level of need, he's got quite complex needs. He attends a special school. And although I can never be his therapist, because it would be entirely unboundaried, you can't say to a young person, tell me about your most awful experiences, and open that box and then go, what do you want for your tea? You know? So what sort of directed me into this therapeutic world was for me to have a better understanding of what was going on for him. And that's how I fell into it. So I can never be his therapist, but I do have a much better understanding of what he needs. And that enables me to advocate more strongly for him.
Do you feel as though there's almost like a conflict of interest there between when you say you can't be his therapist? Is that sort of what you mean by that? You can't sort of be a parent and a therapist at the same time.
So there's a middle ground here, just to be like super pedantic. And the middle ground is to be a therapeutic parent.
Okay.
And so when I work with foster carers and adopters and biological parents of young people who've got complex needs, when we upskill ourselves to have a better understanding of what's happening for our young people, it depersonalizes it.
Right.
So if your child is really dysregulated and they're smashing up the house and they're telling you to F off and other lovely things that are quite hurtful for parents to hear, for parents and carers. And it feels really personal, and it's not personal. So when young people are behaving in ways that we find challenging, having this kind of knowledge helps us to step back and go, okay, what's this behaviour communicating? And what is it about this behaviour that I find particularly triggering right now?
It's quite refreshing for you to say that, because obviously Zoe knows this. Me and my son, we've always had a good relationship, but he's getting older. He's 17 now. He lives with us, but he didn't live with me for a couple of years. But he's living with us, and he's been struggling lately. I think he misses the fact that he doesn't live with his mum anymore. But I've took it very personal, and I've said to Zoe a few times, I feel like he hates me. And I know he doesn't deep down, but that's how it feels. That's how it comes across. And it's refreshing for you to say, it's not aimed at us. It's inside them. I'm not the problem. The problem's with inside him, and that's refreshing to hear, because I sort of almost held myself responsible for his, even though I'm not. I just, as a father, as a parent, you do, don't you?
Yeah, and there's a couple of things there, and there's something that I often think about, is there's a real risk for us as parents that relationships become a bit codependent, where and I'm certainly guilty of this, where I often feel like I can only be as happy as my most miserable child. To watch your child, whether it's your biological child or an adopted or fostered child, to watch your child struggle with something is really painful for a parent, because when our children are tiny, we are all powerful, right? We're like superheroes. Oh, you've cut your knee. Oh, I'll pick you up. I'll make your knee better. Have an ice cream. Have £1 million, blah, blah, blah. And we get to be quite heroic. And then when our kids get older and bigger, the difficulties become more complex and we are less heroic. And then we end up being not heroic at all. And I mean, in my house, I'm the village idiot. Because when our kids hit their teenage years, their parents are cringe, which is something that I'm very guilty of. And I'm not wanting to put a bow on this, but the flip side of your son feeling secure enough in his relationship with you that he can throw poo at you, for want of a better expression, suggests to me that you are his safe place and his safe person, that he feels safe to show you how bad he feels, and he knows you're not going to reject him.
I'll take that. I'll take that all day. That's made me feel better.
So next time he's eggy with you, go, thank you very much. I'm your safe person.
Yeah, no, that's definitely refreshing to hear. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Next question is, what do you think the system, when we're purely talking from a neurodivergent point of view? So the reason that I asked this question is my brother was dyslexic. He still is, obviously, and he had a speech impediment when he was a young boy. And I was the only person who could understand him. And one day he smashed the classroom up in school. He was in the second to last year of primary school, and I was in high school, and they're only a couple of 100 meters away from each other. Anyway, the teacher comes running into my school. Lee, you need to come down to the primary school. Your brother's going crazy. And he was always known for being a naughty child. And I got there, and he was going berserk. And I said, what's the matter, Scott? And bear in mind, he really, you wouldn't know what he was saying, but I could. And he said, I need the toilet. But because they didn't have the tools in place to understand or any form of communication, they just told him to sit down and be quiet. And he went, he's smashing windows. And he said, I need to go to the toilet. And I said, he needs the toilet. And they said, is that it? I said, yeah. He went to the toilet, came back in, sat down, and he was fine. So again, the question is, what do you think, and obviously schools are becoming a lot better, but what do you think the biggest misunderstanding is between your common everyday high school, for instance, and a neurodivergent child?
There's lots of things. I feel like fundamentally, so when I did my teacher training like 100 years ago, we spent one afternoon looking at additional needs. Literally, that was it. So our teacher training was about catering for Joe Average.
Yeah.
And what we understand is that very few of us are, in fact, Joe Average. And the other aspect of that is the scale of teaching, you know, these kind of silos of, if we think about the function of schools, so schools haven't changed for like 100 years. And the reason, I believe at least, the reason that we have a long summer holiday is because when kids first started going to school as a regular thing, it was so that agricultural families would have the kids at home to get in the harvest.
Wow.
How many kids are still members of agricultural families now? And, you know, we've got machinery that brings in the harvest. And we have large class sizes, typically 30. In the real world, when we're an adult and we have a job, are we ever asked to interact with other human beings on that scale? Have you ever been in a workforce of 30?
So I'd say yes to being in that size, but on a day-to-day basis, I never interact with more than 5 or 6 people, maybe a little bit more. But on an average 12-hour day, you'd probably speak to maximum of 8 to 10 people.
Yeah. So we ask young people to do things that we do not typically ask of adults. And in the UK, we're not very many generations away from putting kids down mines and up chimneys. And we're not many generations away from children being seen and not heard. So what seems to be a challenge for schools, and I know that a lot of schools are really working very, very hard indeed to try and move towards trauma-informed practice and to be better at supporting their neurodivergent kids. And the difficulty for schools is the scale of kids that they interact with. We see, just to kind of like, you know, plug my own book, the Green Book, the first,
I was going to plug
the first book about what happens when I'm scared, was written very specifically for young people around top age primary, lower age secondary, because in the fostering world, that is the key age for placements disrupting. And it's a key age for young people being excluded from school because that transition. So in primary school, you might have lots of neurodivergent young people who just kind of stay under the radar. They can just about cope, hanging on by their fingertips because they've got, yes, they're hanging out with 30 kids. Yes, it's a loud environment, lots of sensory stimulation and overstimulation, but they have a relationship with one key adult, their class teacher. They're not moving around the school every 50 minutes. And then they go to secondary school. They are typically in a much larger environment, a much bigger number of young people. They're typically moving around the school every 50 minutes. So the sensory overload just becomes unbearable. And so what that book kind of covers is how our amygdala responds to that threat, because it's perceived as a threat. So for the vast majority of neurodivergent conditions, and again, I'm just some woman who has got a really sad hobby of reading research papers, but, you know, go and dig this stuff out. Don't take my word for any of it. A lot of neurodivergent conditions impact our capacity for executive function. An executive function is our filter. So if, for example, so I don't mind sharing, I'm dyslexic, I'm dyspraxic, I was quite late to the party, I wasn't formally diagnosed till I was doing my master's. So I'd survived school, and I survived university, and I survived working as a teacher. But I always believed that I just wasn't very clever, and that's why everything was really hard and took really long. And then I was doing my master's, and my mentor suggested it and said, go and have a chat with the learning support team, because you might be neurodivergent. And I was like, oh, that all makes so much sense now. So how I had stayed under the radar is very typically for neurodivergent girls and women. We are super good at masking. We are super good at conforming. And the example that you've given for your brother, that mask was too heavy to hold up that day. So the sensory information that his brain was receiving, we need the toilet and we need it now. And then his amygdala would have been on high alert to protect him from the indignity, the embarrassment, the shame of, soiling himself in front of his peers. So his amygdala started flipping tables because that kept him safe. Yeah. And it did keep him safe, because the outcome of that amygdala response was that you turned up, you supported him, he got what he needed.
When we talk about diagnosis, so this has been another topic of conversation around a lot of people that I've dealt with. Diagnosis is good, right? We understand the problem. Do you believe there's a difference between that and having a label, attaching yourself to a certain label? What I've tend to have found a lot, especially in addiction and PTSD, bipolar, things like this. I'm pretty certain I've got PTSD. I have never had a diagnosis, but I don't believe it's necessary now. Maybe when I was 18, 19, it would have been really beneficial. I understand. I've been to therapy. I've done quite a bit of therapy, and I've got the guy who's mentoring me now. He's a psychologist, and we've really done a lot of work, haven't we, over the last 12 months on understanding my pains, my issues. So I'm fine with that now. What I tend to find a lot with people is they will associate so much to the diagnosis that it then becomes a way of life, almost a limit as such. And do you believe there is a difference? Do you believe that having that label can almost decrease possibility of outcome when it comes to potential, especially in children?
So for me, it depends on ownership. Who owns these labels?
Right.
So I've got labels in the clothing that I'm wearing, and it's how I know what temperature to wash them on. You don't need to know that.
Yeah.
You don't need to look inside my top and see what temperature my top gets washed on, because that information is only required by me. And that seems like the key.
Right.
So if we are handed a label, oh, well, you're that sort of kid. And I do come across this. I work with young people in schools in 2025 who are smart, really, really smart kids. And they're struggling at school. There's a risk of exclusion. They're getting in fights. And they have received a label of a naughty kid. They're a naughty kid. And that is the only type of kid that is available to them. They have incredibly limited opportunity to reinvent themselves. And so more than one young person has shared with me, in my school, I'm in bottom set because I'm dyslexic. And if you're dyslexic in my school, you can't be in top set. Wow. When was that a thing? So that's because the young person's dyslexia doesn't belong to them. It belongs to school.
Or parents.
Yeah. So if a young person has a diagnosis of dyslexia and they are given tools and resources and strategies. So if I leave here later today, break my leg, right? No one's going to go, well, that's just who you are now. You're just the woman with the broken leg. We're not going to support you. We're not going to put a plaster on it or offer you any physio. That's just who you are now.
Yeah.
So I could be like limping around on this broken leg, like seriously inconvenienced by it, because nobody's given me any tools and they've told me that's who I am now. And that's incredibly limiting.
Absolutely.
So when we think about neurodivergence and mental health challenges, for me, they all fall under that umbrella. I keep them under a very, very broad umbrella. So if somebody experiences mental ill health, I consider that in the same way as for a person who is neurodivergent. If this is how your brain is working, whether it's a short-term thing, a longer-term thing, a forever thing, let's work with your brain. Let's not work against your brain. So it seems to me that it's about all of us having the tools, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
So if we know ourselves and we know how we work, we know what works for us, we then are better positioned to advocate for ourselves.
I completely agree. Something that I found coming out of addiction is everybody wanted me to identify as an addict. And I had a real problem with it. Because even though I'd struggled with addiction, at my identity, why would I want to go around and say, I'm an addict, I'm Lee, my name's Lee, I've struggled with addiction. And that's where the guy who's mentoring me now, he picked up on that and he said, you know, that's a rarity, especially coming into recovery. And all programs are positive, right? They all want a positive outcome for the people involved. But I just felt like that was, it burned the back of my brain. It was when people said, you're an addict, you've got this disease. And I'm like, it just burned a big hole in the back of my brain. And I'm thinking, no, I'm not going to identify as an addict. I'm in recovery. I no longer use anything. Therefore, I'm not going to do it. I identify as Lee. These are my issues that I'm working on. And the reason that I ask this is because I've met quite a few really amazing people through what I'm doing. But they identify in a way that I genuinely believe gives definition to who they are. And I've got a friend of mine, he's called the Bipolar Podcast. Brilliant guy, lovely lad. But I've spoke to him and I said, you may have bipolar, but you are not bipolar. And there's a big difference, I think. You know, we can identify, we're so much more as human beings. That's what I believe. You know, you said about people, that's the way I always thought. People who are dyslexic are thick. That's the way I thought as a child. That's the way it was ingrained into us as humans. You've just told me you're dyslexic and you've got a master's degree, which clearly proves that that's incorrect massively. But as children, that's the way I was raised. I always thought my brother was, you know, stupid. I'm not going to lie. But he's fell into a massive cannabis addiction now, which doesn't help him. And that's through trauma. That's what I've realised this year, that's through trauma. Same as my addiction. And probably something that I need to take on a lot more, especially after having this conversation, is understanding him maybe. Because because of the lifestyle that he lives, he's not willing to accept help. He lives almost a criminal lifestyle, or has for many years. But just from having this conversation, it sort of give me that little bit more of an understanding as to him, and maybe by the time we finish, that'll be more definitive. But yeah, I guess you know you've answered my question there, that I do believe labels are limiting, and I think we're so much, regardless. You know, I've children with autism. I've got a cousin who's incredible at drawing, but yet a lot of people will look on autistic children and think, you know, they're this or they're that, and I think they're very, very close. There's a fine line, you know, that genius gene, because a lot of autistic children are absolute geniuses at something, and that was going to be one of my next questions. And autistic children have a difficulty adapting to environment, don't they? And I think my question is, you know, how do we go about understanding children with autism a lot more and helping them adapt to environments?
So it seems like the key is, because there is this narrative around autism, so it's been perceived very much as a condition for boys and men. And the reason it's being considered that way is because the assessments have been designed by men to capture the experiences of boys and men. Right. You know, typically white, middle-class boys, those assessments work really well for them. Not so much young people from other cultures, and not been incredibly helpful for girls, because girls' presentation is very, very different. And so there's this narrative in popular culture that you're Rain Man or you're eating Lego. You know, there's nobody in between. There's nothing happening in between. Yeah. And this kind of person-first approach, where first of all, you are a person, you are you. There is only one of you on this planet, right? There's only one Lee. That's
I
it.
agree.
So
You're
therefore,
right,
if there is only one of you, who is the expert at being you? Is it going to be me or is it going to be you?
Yeah, me.
So if I were working with you in any capacity whatsoever, I'd be saying, right, Lee, tell me, what do you notice about things that are helpful for you? What do you notice works well for you? What do you notice is challenging for you? What do you feel would be useful for us to experiment with in terms of support?
Yeah. Do you believe that question gets asked a lot, or is there just a certain process? Because obviously you said you're either Rain Man or you're eating Lego. Obviously there's a spectrum in through the middle of that. Do you believe that especially in schools, let's say, do you believe that there is that understanding, or is it just sort of a similar process across the board of identifying, right, this child has autism, we need to do X, Y, and Z, rather than asking the child or asking the parents, what is X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, and I have worked with young people who have been told, oh, well, you're not autistic because you can make eye contact. Because that's what autism is, apparently. It's whether or not you can make eye contact with people. Whereas actually we know it's much, much more detailed than that. And it's unique to everybody. Every single person is going to experience their autism differently because every single person experiences being on this planet differently. Each of us exists in a field of one. Yeah. And what I observe in schools is schools kind of, they might do this thing where they go, oh, well, you know, if you feel overloaded, if the sensory environment is too much for you, you can have a pass to leave the classroom and go to, I don't know, some hub or some sort of, you know, quieter setting. And then if a young person is really becoming quite dysregulated, quite distressed, and they take themselves out of the classroom without asking the teacher first, that's then problematic. So there's an expectation placed on these young people that when they dysregulate, they still have the capacity to say, oh, I say, miss, would you mind terribly awfully if I popped out of the classroom for 5 minutes? That's not how dysregulation presents itself. So if schools are saying to young people, we're going to give you these strategies so that you're not flipping chairs and behaving in ways that might not be safe. However, we are going to place restrictions over how you access the support that we've decided we're going to give you. And then other things as well, like it's been exam time. So young people, oh, you've got this pass, you can take yourself off to the hub if you need 5 minutes to decompress, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Oh, but you can't use it now because it's exam time.
When we talk about sort of emotional regulation as children, which is where a lot of our issues come from as adults, right? Our inability to regulate our emotional state. And when I speak to people about it now, you look back on it now and it's so easy to address. So summertime, for instance, when you're a child and when you were in school as a kid in primary school, you loved it when it was dead sunny, you wanted to go out and you'd run on the playground and the teachers would say, you can go out, but don't run on the grass. And it's like, well, you can be excited, but not too excited that you can run on the grass and play football with your friends. It was a case of sit down, be quiet, be interested in this topic of conversation. You're told to eat when they tell you to. You're supposed to sit down, be quiet, and all these things. It's like you know what mirror neurons are, and we mirror our environment to the point where we feel like we are accepted or fit in. And it's just, you look at it now and you think there is so much wrong with the process of growing up in this world. No wonder, pardon my French, no wonder we're all fucked. No wonder we've all got an issue in one way, shape or another. Because it's just, again, conspiracy theories coming out in me, but it just seems as though there is a narrative to the way that we educate children. Have you looked at the Scandinavian way that they educate children?
I have.
Have you?
So when I was teaching, this puts a date on it, Gordon Brown, Prime Minister, he was very interested in the Scandinavian model. So I was teaching then, and I went to Finland for a week with maybe 10 other educators, and we were tasked with doing this research project to find out why Finland comes out top in all of like the child well-being tables, health, education, I mean, shiny, lovely. What was fascinating and really demoralising, and it was hilarious because our research never got published. What was fascinating is it wasn't about the education system, it was societal. In Finland, they value children and families. And in Finnish law, and when I came back, I was kind of tasked with presenting my observations, my findings, blah, 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 to different groups of people, social workers, educators. And a couple of social workers really, really took issue with this, kind of responded quite angrily when, you know, talk about shoot the messenger, because I'd shared with them that in Finland, in law, children are equal to adults in law.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In the UK, the legal status of children is their property. They are the property of their parents or they are the property of the state.
Until they're 16.
Yes. And then in Finland, children are equal to adults in law. So child protection thresholds, for example, in Finland, far, far lower than child protection thresholds here. In Finland, in Finnish schools, it is illegal to segregate children by academic ability. You are not allowed to place children in sets. You don't have that stigma of, oh, well, I'm top set. Oh, are you not top set? Oh, are you bottom set? Oh, well, that's who you are then. You're a bottom set kid.
So it almost takes away that, just from a child's emotional perspective, that takes away bullying almost, because you're integrated a lot more. The environment becomes a lot more comfortable and understanding. That alone for a child is huge, right? In schools, bullying.
Yeah.
You know, when we were children, you know, if you were bottom set for something or in a special needs, we used to get absolutely terrorized. And to the point where a friend of mine who I've met on social media, his addiction stems from bullying in school. And yeah, that's the biggest thing that I can take away from that. And so when you say that the Child Protective Services is it's a lot lower.
Yeah.
That means the child has a lot more boundaries. It's a lot safer for a child then, I'd assume.
And for families, interventions come earlier, come quicker. We, for a long time in the UK, we've been very, very poor at early intervention. And we kind of, and as well, it's this whole ethos, you know, it goes so far and wide. So in Scandinavian criminal justice system, it's all about rehabilitation. In the UK, it's about punishment. So if somebody gets something wrong, you know, for want of a better expression, something goes wrong for somebody or somebody gets something wrong, they are punished and they will leave the prison system no better off, and in many cases worse off, because they're institutionalised, their mental health is likely to be poorer, and there's all data to support this. Their mental health is likely to be poorer, perhaps they've been radicalised. When we look at the demographic of the prison population in the UK, neurodivergent people are overrepresented. People with learning disabilities are overrepresented. Care experienced people are overrepresented. Trauma experienced people are overrepresented. So we are punishing people for being neurodivergent, care experienced, trauma experienced, having a learning disability is the bottom line. And other countries don't behave that way.
I came across a study, again, you'll probably know what it is. It's called the Rat Park in Addiction, where they have a rat that's isolated on its own, and it's got 2 bottles of water. One of them's normal water, one of them's water with heroin and cocaine. And because he's in isolation, he drinks the heroin and cocaine. They put him in a cage full of rats with toys and wheels, and the same rat chose normal water. And they also did it in Portugal, where I think it was offenders who'd struggled with addiction, and the crime was based around the addiction, so whether that be theft for money or whatever it was, they integrated them into almost like an apprenticeship. So rather than placing them in jail for, don't get me wrong, the more serious crimes, obviously you'd have to serve time, but if it was, I don't want to say petty crimes, but theft, robbery, things like
what's the function of the crime? Yeah.
They'd integrate them back into society through an apprenticeship. So if one of the individuals said, well, I love car mechanics, they say, okay, we'll find you, a place that you can work for free for 12 months. And then, if you're successful. And they had a recovery rate of, I don't want to say the exact number, but it was huge. And they did that in Portugal, and I think they still do it. And the success they found through integration and connection back into society in a positive way it's improved their addiction issue massively. And I totally agree. Don't want to keep talking about my brother, but it's a well-known fact that he went to prison a couple of years ago and came out with a bigger drug problem than when he went in. And it's something that's well known. Drugs are more easily accessible in jails than they are on the streets.
Absolutely. And we do this with our kids as well. If we think about how a lot of people believe it's appropriate to discipline their kids. And the word discipline comes from disciple, right? So if we think about Bible stories, I'm struggling to think of any in which Jesus punished his followers. He taught his followers, right? That's what disciple means, and discipline is to teach, not to punish.
Yeah.
And we've got really fixated that if somebody gets something wrong, there must be a consequence. They must be punished for that. And if we just apply logic, who gets better by being punished? So if I go back to my imaginary broken leg that I'm not going to break later, my imaginary broken leg, am I going to rock up at the hospital and they're going to tell me off? Oh, you've been so stupid. It's your own fault. This is a lifestyle choice that you've gone and broken your leg. Nobody's going to do that to me. They're going to go, oh, poor you, let us help you. We'll sort out your broken leg. It'll heal. It'll get better. And yet with so many challenges that people face, we have a really entrenched narrative in our society that being poor is a lifestyle choice. Being reliant on substances in order to survive and cope and exist, oh, that's a lifestyle choice. Underachieving at school, oh, that's a lifestyle choice. It's very, very lazy. It's a very lazy sidestepping of collective responsibility. I
agree. I keep resorting back to what I know through addiction, but when the terminology of disease, and I know certain people call it, certain people don't, pick whatever name. To me, the word disease lacks accountability from myself. It lacks the decisions I made, the choices I made, and what you're saying there, it sounds very similar. It lacks massive.
Can I be super pedantic?
Yeah.
When you were talking about the choices you made,
yeah.
What if we thought of it in terms of the choices you had, the choices that were available to you?
Yeah, I can agree with that, because in NLP, one of the presuppositions, I think it's we have all the resources we need, but at the same time, we only know what we know, right? So I can completely agree with that, but at the same time, for me, I chose to do what I did. I could have said no. So that's something that is huge for me this year, is accountability. I could have said no. The strain that I had on my relationship with Zoe, I put her through hell. And that was my choice. And there is, when it's the choices we have, inevitably it's a yes and a no, really, from me. And yeah, I'm quite passionate about that, really, because without the accountability, the pain that I caused other human beings seems to fall by the wayside. And I think for me, it sounds cheap. It sounds, am I supposed to not be responsible then for the pain that I've caused other people? So
I suppose it's this thing of, if if I'm working with someone who tells me they've got a problematic relationship with a substance of any kind, I'll be asking them, what's the function? What's the function of that? So I'm yet to meet somebody who has a problematic relationship with a substance because they were partying hard.
I agree, yeah.
You know, people aren't partying. It's a maladaptive coping strategy.
Yeah.
So I've got a headache, I chuck a couple of paracetamol down, job done. If I've got an unbearable emotional, psychological pain, paracetamol's not going to touch that.
Yeah.
I'm likely to self-medicate and get myself in all sorts of bother, for which you're absolutely right. I am accountable if my behaviours are harmful to other people.
Yeah.
And part of that recovery would be about, how do I repair those relationships?
Totally agree.
And kind of, you know, even like with my kids, when stuff goes wrong, and I get stuff wrong with them, you know, my nickname at home is the Dragon Woman. Because when I go, right? Which is very therapeutic, obviously. And then I'm accountable. And then I say to my kids, I'm really sorry that I used a big voice. It wasn't appropriate at all. And it wasn't your fault. And it's not your job to fix that. I need to go away and have a think about what it was for me that made me go pop about that thing. Because that's me being a grown-up. So very often when people experience early life trauma, there is a growing area of research around this, but something that I observe anecdotally is people can get a little bit stunted emotionally. It's almost as if they get frozen in time.
Yeah.
And pause button has been pressed on their emotional development. So they will be emotionally immature. So then if I'm working with someone, I have to work with them where they are emotionally, in terms of their emotional maturity, not what it says on their birth certificate.
Yeah.
So if I'm working with someone who's wearing an adult body, but really they're functioning emotionally at about 12, that's kind of where I'll be pitching the work.
It's funny you should say the number 12. So the way I seen it, and I've explained this before, is that I was even though I'm an adult, deep down, I was a child for most of my adult life. A lot of my trauma stems from around the number 12. And it was only, I've told this story loads of times, but I went to an event in Wigan, Master Your Mind, it was called, and we did a mindfulness and meditation work. And I went back to revisit my childhood self. And I broke down in tears in front of cage fighters, jiu-jitsu guys. I broke down, but I came home, didn't I? And I said it was one of the most powerful experiences I've ever had, because it learned me to love myself. Still had to work on myself for a long time after that. You know, it wasn't the healing's done. But yeah, that was. And the other thing that I've learned is that, say for instance, we have a huge traumatic experience at 11 or 12 years old. A lot of the time and I knew that before you said it, it stunts our ability to grow as human beings. But every time we go back to relive that experience and relive that moment, we experience it as a child and not a 37-year-old grown man. Every time I did relive that experience, I've got a different emotional attachment to the experiences now, and they're slowly getting better and better and better, or quickly getting better and better and better, should I say. But for a long time, when I think of those experiences as a child, I was probably experiencing the moment in that much of an amplified state that certain things may not have happened. I might have just added those pieces into the story. And also I was reliving those emotions from the little Lee. And that's something that I didn't realise until this year, and has helped me a lot in understanding my emotional state now. Because emotions are always present, aren't they? Even though we have them in the past, the emotions we feel now are always present. So by attaching a different emotional association to that moment, it's allowed me to grow a lot more this year as a human. It's been the hardest year of my life, but it's been the most powerful and passionate year of my life ever.
And there's also a lot of power, and this might be something that you've experimented with already. There's a huge power in going back and having conversations with our younger selves and saying, wow, you survived that. Well done, you. and thanking our younger selves and thanking the version of ourselves that got things wrong.
Yeah.
Because the younger version of ourselves could not have known the things that we know now.
Yeah.
And when we kind of, if we're not careful and accountability slips into blaming and shaming ourselves for getting things wrong, part of that accountability is thanking ourselves for surviving.
Yeah.
And surviving isn't pretty. And when we understand how our brain works, and so we've got the 3 bits of brain that I tend to focus on when I'm working with anybody is our amygdala. It's our internal smoke alarm. It's got one function and one function only, and that is to keep us safe.
Yeah.
So if a tiger walked in this room right now, right,
I'd be out the window.
Yeah. I wouldn't get to choose how I would respond to that because my amygdala would take over completely.
Yeah.
And my amygdala would go with fight, flight, friend, flop, freeze.
Yeah.
Those would be the 5 choices available to my amygdala. And it would go with the one it felt would give me the likeliest chance of survival. Yeah. So if my amygdala chose for me to feed you to the tiger, right? I'm safe, brilliant. What a result for my amygdala. And then afterwards, I come out of that surviving state, my cognitive brain comes back online, and my cognitive brain goes, oh, my word, I cannot believe you did that. I cannot believe you fed Lee to the tiger.
Yeah, yeah.
And my amygdala goes, I'd do it all again. You just need to survive. That's all we need.
It's always first.
And then to integrate our cognitive brain and our somatic brain. So our somatic brain, when our amygdala is activated, our cognitive brain is not available to us, which is why there would be no process in my response to that tiger. And then
you're talking about like the neocortex, prefrontal cortex aspect of the brain. Is that what you mean by when you say it's not accessible? That part of the brain.
Oh yeah. So your amygdala, that's all that is functioning in that moment.
Yeah, in the limbic system.
Yeah. You've got much cleverer words than me. This is why I write books for children.
So the way I was taught it was, so if you look at the hand, you have the brainstem, which is the reptilian brain, then do it on that hand. Then you have the thumb, which is the limbic system where the amygdala sits. And then this top finger is your prefrontal cortex, which is your rational brain.
Yeah.
When the tiger runs in and you decide to feed me to the tiger, that happens.
Yeah.
Where the emotional brain it takes over and you go,
yeah,
hey, Ali, you're getting eaten.
Yeah.
That's the way I was taught.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the model that I refer to much more poorly. But yeah. And so when we don't have access to the clever brain, the thinking, planning brain, we only have access to our somatic brain, our emotional brain.
Yeah.
So in periods of trauma, when we're trying to unpack trauma and trying to diffuse it, like you found a World War II bomb at the bottom of your garden or whatever, and you want to take the power out of it. And it's very, very difficult to revisit and access those traumatic experiences because they're not stored as linear narrative memories in our cognitive brain. They're stored somatically in our emotional brain. So we've got the emotions to go with it. So you have a traumatic experience or a prolonged traumatic experience. So, for example, with PTSD, often we think of that in terms of single event trauma. A horrible thing happens to you, and then you go, oh, that was really horrible, but I'm safe now. So we remember what it was like to feel safe before the event. We have the event, terrifying, awful, and then we recreate safety for ourselves. We regain safety for ourselves. With CPTSD, complex trauma, what's incredibly difficult is when people have traumatic childhood experiences that last for a long period of time. And if I'm working with somebody who doesn't have a baseline of safety, so if I'm saying to them, yeah, you've had this awful time, let's try and remember a time when you were safe and get you back there. And they go, what's that?
Yeah.
I've never been safe. I don't know what safety looks like. So we're having to start from scratch creating safety.
So then do you have to physically create that environment for them to experience it then? if they've never experienced safety before, would you then have to create that sort of literally the physical environment for them to experience it, or are you just doing it cognitively?
We're kind of doing it cognitively.
Okay.
But also a really big challenge for people is if they are not quite safe yet.
Okay.
You know, so if people are in a relationship that's abusive, or when I'm working with young people who are, their amygdala is firing off all day long at school. And when your amygdala fires off, when you have that amygdala response, it takes 40 minutes for our cortisol levels to return to normal.
Putting that down.
So if we go pop, so an example for an adult that resonates with a lot of people, you're driving your car, someone cuts you up, nothing bad happens to you. They don't clip you, nothing happens at all, but they cut you up and your amygdala responds to that because our amygdala hasn't evolved to recognize that we're sitting in a car and we're safe and nothing happened. So then you get the jitters and you feel sick. And maybe you have a good swear at the driver who's long gone and has no idea that you've had this amygdala response. They don't know and they don't care. They're long gone. And we feel sick, or we get the jitters, or, you know, kind of your knees feel like jelly. And that's that release of cortisol so that we can fight the tiger or outrun the tiger. But there's no tiger. We just got cut up in a car. And so for young people, if they're going pop at school, and it takes 40 minutes for their cortisol level to come back down again, that's a lesson. Yeah. So when young people don't feel safe at school because the sensory environment doesn't feel safe for them, for example, if they're neurodivergent, they will have this hypersensitive, over-responsive amygdala that is popping off, and they don't get a chance to regulate in between those 40 minutes.
And I think that brings me on to my last question, because we were speaking off camera before, and I think I said to you, I'd learned that process in something called a neuroceptive mismatch. For children, now, I'm extremely proud that I've learned this all in like 9 months. I understand what the HBA axis is in the brain. Emotional memory, I think it's stored in the hippocampus. And then you've got these words, amygdala, cerebellum, limbic system, prefrontal cortex. I've learned these and I'm like, this is so difficult, but I've done it. How does a child learn that? Because that must be difficult. And I guess that's what these two books are about, right?
Yeah.
So you must be, I mean, if somebody would have tried to explain this to me as a child, I'd have gone, I've got no clue. So the method obviously works. So I'd love to hear how you do it. So
I get really positive feedback about the books because the books depersonalize the behavior. So, you know, when you were saying earlier that when your son is dysregulated or struggling with some big emotions and you cop for it because you're his safe person, woohoo, go you, and that feels personal, that lands, and it's like, oh, you know, wounding. And for young people, often they will internalize that and they'll go, I've just gone pop. I've just upset my parent, my teacher, my friend, my whoever. I must be a bad person. Because they don't have any other narrative to explain their behaviour.
Okay.
So they're a bad person. And then if you're at school and you've got kind of a behaviour system that's quite punitive, that belief that you went pop because you're a bad person, that'll be reinforced for you. So by using this kind of like brain biology approach, it's not about us sidestepping our responsibilities to do well for ourselves and to make positive choices. It's about us understanding what the brain biology is. Why did my brain respond that way? Why did my brain think it was a good idea for me to swear at the teacher or flip a table? And then we go, oh, hang on a minute, my amygdala perceived there was a big threat to me then. So I'm going to start to have these conversations with my amygdala and go, do you know what, we are safe. And to kind of downgrade, I'm going to die, to, yeah, that's annoying.
Yeah. So it's not that you necessarily speak about, say, the individual parts of the brain. You focus, like you said before, around the amygdala and that process. But what that does then, that allows the narrative to open up conversations on the whys, the hows, the whens, the whats.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the second book about healthy and respectful relationships, how that came about, is something that I noticed was a lot of neurodivergent teenagers I was working with, particularly autistic and ADHD teenagers, are sometimes socially and emotionally quite a bit younger than their chronological age. So when they're navigating relationships with their peers or romantic relationships, there's an expectation that they're 18, but maybe they're kind of 10, 11.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And if we haven't had experiences of people behaving towards us, so our primary caregivers, in those early years, we haven't had experiences of people behaving respectfully towards us, how are we going to know what that looks like? How are we going to expect people to behave in ways that are respectful if we've never had that experience? And how can we reciprocate that? Because we don't know what that looks like. So it's really kind of starting from that baseline of, wow, really nobody knows what's going on here.
I like it. I've got one more question. If you could wave a magic wand for sort of school environments and children who are neurodivergent, and you could make it whatever you wanted it to be, the perfect scenario, how would that look?
We'd all move to Finland.
I'd like to move to Finland. I'd like
chilly in the winter, but I'd take it.
I prefer the cold.
I feel like the bit that is really missing in the education system in the UK is for young people to understand how their own brains work. And I had this real moment when I was doing the therapeutic training to be a therapeutic foster carer, where I was like, wow, the penny dropped for a couple of kids that I'd worked with over the years. And I don't feel like my teaching practice was at all harmful to anybody that I taught. But if I had understood more about brain development, my practice would have been a little bit different. And very specifically, and I'm not going to name this kid because I can't remember the name anyway because it was so long ago, but this kid in a class of 30 was like, was just like a limpet. This kid was everywhere all the time. Yip, 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 yip. And I'd be like, yeah, in a minute, I'll come and see you in a minute. I've not forgotten you. I've just got 29 other young people to deal with. And so this kid was like a jack in a box, like, don't forget me, don't forget me, don't forget me. And that would have likely been, by old me, that would likely have been considered in the context of being attention seeking, like, oh, that kid just wants my attention every minute of every day. What I understand now is that kid was attachment seeking. That kid did not feel safe. And the moment that my eyes were off that kid needed me back, even if that was in quite negative ways. And when my adopted son was younger, he found school incredibly difficult. He found being apart from me incredibly difficult. And what I used to do, and it doesn't work anymore because he's 15, so any ideas, I'm here for it. In a morning when we were going to school, I used to tie invisible string on his finger and my finger. And it was invisible because it was magic string. And it meant that we were attached to each other all day long. And that really, really helped him to feel safe in school.
It's like an association technique.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I like that. And it's good, especially, with children, that we have such a vivid imagination, and you genuinely believe that, wouldn't you? You could feel that almost, especially as a kid. You could probably do something like that with me now, and I'd probably believe it.
And I shared it with the TA at his school, and I said to her, if he's dysregulating during the day, check his invisible string. And if you can't see it, it's still on and it's working. Remind him about his invisible string.
I like that.
And it really helped.
That could be something you could use with Scarlett, maybe. That'd be cool.
Or, you know, if that's a little bit too sort of babyish, a squirt of your perfume so that you're connected all day because she smells like you, you know, because smells are safety.
That's it. As far as I'm concerned, I've got one more question that I ask everybody at the end. If you could have 4 people from the past, they could be alive or not, it could be here or whoever you want it to be, to sit round a dinner table with yourself, who would the 4 people be?
Oh, okay, right. Kathy Burke.
Okay.
Really like Kathy Burke. Ian Hislop.
Don't know him.
He's off. Have I got news for you? I would consider leaving my family for Ian Hislop. It's perhaps an unconventional crush.
Okay.
But I feel like he'd be really good to chat politics with, and he just seems like a grown-up, and he probably makes a good cocktail. I'm making loads of assumptions about a man who I've watched on the telly. So Kathy Burke, Ian Hislop. I also really like Frankie Boyle. I'm listening to a podcast that he's doing at the moment, and he has really challenged my thinking. So I'm just going to give you this before I think of a 4th person. So when we talk about vulnerability and we talk about people being vulnerable, if people are vulnerable because the actions of their government make them vulnerable, are they vulnerable or are they oppressed?
I'd say both. I'd say, I mean, oppression is known. Oppression has to be known, right? Has to be. I mean, Nazi Germany was oppression, right? With Auschwitz, that was oppression. I mean, that was physically known. I mean, I don't know.
So if, for example, if people who rely on benefits, disability benefits, for example, if they are pushed to the margins of society by the decisions of their government, because there's a narrative that, you know, these disabled people, they just need to stop being disabled and go and get a job, really, don't they? You know, they're too expensive, but my word, we cannot consider taxing billionaires. That's just beyond the pale.
So what's your answer?
So what Frankie Boyle has made me do is every time I catch myself using the word vulnerable, I ask myself that question. And I ask myself, would this group of people or this individual that I've just labelled as being vulnerable, would they be vulnerable if they were supported differently, if they were responded to differently? So he gets a place.
That's a very difficult question. Do you believe there is a right or wrong answer with that at this moment in time? I believe that sort of narrative can sway both ways depending on who's having that conversation.
I suppose the key word is probably nuance. You know, if we're kind of looking at binaries and it's definitely this or it's definitely that, we miss all the interesting stuff in the middle. Yeah. But he certainly got me thinking.
I thought you were going to say because he likes to swear and abuse people a lot that you'd have him in there.
I do like a good swear, and I've really reined myself in today.
I felt bad for swearing before. I don't feel bad now.
No, I love a good swear. There's a piece of research, right, where people had to put their hands in ice water, and one group of people were allowed to swear, and the other group of people were not. And the people who had a good swear could keep their hands in the ice water for longer. So swearing is good for you.
When I was in the fire service for a couple of years, and when we did the BA training, obviously you've got to go into burning buildings, and they used to do that there, funnily enough. So you dip your wrists into ice buckets because it was the closest to your blood. So you'd cool yourself down, and they'd say to you, I bet you can't not swear for 10 seconds when you come out. And very rarely did somebody do it. Everybody would swear. But as soon as you dip it, and you'd get the as you were putting your hands in, and everyone would be fuck. One more person.
Right. I always remember her name incorrectly, and there's so many. I'm really struggling to only have 4. The woman who played Liz in Motherland, although the whole cast of Motherland is fantastic anyway, and she's called Diane somebody, and she also does Philomena Kunk.
Philomena Kunk, I know that name.
Where she does like these fake documentaries, and they are just pant-wettingly funny. She's really, really deadpan. And she'll ask like some Cambridge professor about the cultural significance of Beyonce or something with a really, really straight face. She's wonderful.
Just a pure piss take. That'd be quite a funny table to sit around. A couple of comedians and there, people making you laugh.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that when we're thinking about serious things, it can be quite crushing. And when we're playful with it, it's not because we're being disrespectful about it. We're actually protecting ourselves from just being crushed by the enormity of being a human in 2025.
Yeah, totally agree. Claudia, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. It's been lovely.
The 2 books, What Happens When I'm Scared and How to Have Healthy and Respectful Relationships. If you send me the link for them, I'll put them underneath the title of the YouTube.
Thank you. Well, you can't even sell those on. I've devalued them because I wrote in them, sorry.
No, it's no problem. We'll keep these. They'll probably be good for me. But yeah, I'll put the link in for anybody who's watching who's having difficulties or whatnot with their children and the teaching. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Job done.